Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is Mistborn, The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. In the vast, ash-choked world of Scadrial, Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series stands as a titan of modern fantasy, celebrated for its intricate magic system, compelling characters, and a narrative that consistently defies expectation. Mistborn, The Well of Ascension, the second installment in this epic trilogy, plunges us deeper into the aftermath of a world irrevocably altered by the defeat of the Lord Ruler. It's a tale that grapples with the immense burden of leadership, the corrosive nature of power, and the desperate search for hope in a land still reeling from centuries of oppression. This novel isn't just a bridge between the foundational, the final empire, and the explosive conclusion of the hero of ages. It's a profound exploration of what happens when the chosen hero realizes that victory is merely the beginning of an even greater struggle. As we embark on this journey, prepare to witness the fragile rebirth of a society, the terrifying whispers of ancient prophecies, and the ever-present shadow of a force that seeks to undo all that was fought for. Join us as we unravel the intricate tapestry of the Well of Ascension, where heroes are forged not just in battle, but in the crucible of their own doubts and the relentless pursuit of an elusive peace. The world of Scadrial, freshly liberated from the oppressive tyranny of the Lord Ruler, found itself in a precarious state of flux. The ash continued to fall, the mist still claimed the night, but the crushing weight of 1,000 years of subjugation had been lifted. Yet freedom, as Kelsier's crew quickly discovered, was a far more complex and demanding master than tyranny. The Well of Ascension opens with a stark portrayal of this new reality, focusing on Elend Venture, now King Elend Venture, albeit a king presiding over a shaky alliance of powerful nobles, each vying for their own slice of the newfound power. Vin, the girl who killed the Lord Ruler, found herself grappling with an entirely different kind of battle, not one of physical might, but of internal conflict. Her identity, so long defined by the shadows and the fight, was now adrift in the unfamiliar waters of courtly life and the unexpected demands of a relationship with Elend. The initial glow of victory had faded, replaced by the grim reality of governing a shattered society. Armies were marching on Luthadel, the capital city, from all sides. Straff Venture, Elend's own father and a ruthless, calculating nobleman, led one such army, driven by an insatiable hunger for power and a disdain for his son's idealistic approach to leadership. From the north came the forces of Ashweather Set, a cunning and equally ambitious lord, whose intentions were just as menacing. And then there was the looming threat of the Koloss, monstrous, blue-skinned creatures of unknown origin, their numbers growing daily, posing a horrifying and unpredictable variable to an already volatile situation. Luthadel, once the seat of the Lord Ruler's unchallenged might, was now a besieged city, its walls a fragile barrier against the encroaching chaos. The initial attempts at establishing a functional government were faltering under the pressure of these external threats and the internal squabbling of the nobility. Elend, despite his genuine desire to rule justly and create a better world, found himself ill-equipped for the cutthroat world of politics. His idealism often clashed with the harsh realities of governance, making him vulnerable to the machinations of those who sought to exploit the power vacuum. Vin, ever the protector, struggled with her role as queen. The delicate dance of courtly intrigue and the expectations placed upon her as Elend's consort felt alien and suffocating. Her instincts screamed for her to act, to fight, but the battles now were fought with words and alliances, not with duralumin bursts and steel pushes. Her loyalty to Elend was unwavering, yet she wrestled with the fear that her very nature, that of a Mistborn assassin, was incompatible with the peace they so desperately sought. The memory of Kelsier, her mentor and the charismatic leader who had ignited the revolution, loomed large. His absence was keenly felt, not just by Vin, but by the entire crew, who found themselves navigating this treacherous new landscape without his guiding hand and strategic brilliance. Sazed, the terraceman keeper, continued his meticulous work of preserving knowledge, his vast erudition proving invaluable in understanding the history of Scadrial and the nature of the Lord Ruler's reign. Yet even he, with his stoic demeanor and boundless knowledge, began to feel the weight of the unfolding crisis. The prophecies he had studied so diligently hinted at a Well of Ascension, a place of immense power, but its true nature and location remained shrouded in mystery, an ancient riddle that held the key to Scadrial's past and perhaps its future. The burden of leadership, the constant threat of war, and the gnawing uncertainty of their new world began to take their toll on the heroes who had overthrown a god. The initial jubilation had given way to a grim determination, a resolve to protect what they had fought so hard to achieve, even if the path ahead was shrouded in mist and shadowed by the specter of utter collapse. The stage was set for a desperate struggle, not just for the survival of Luthadel, but for the very soul of a nascent world. As the sieges tightened around Luthadel, the city found itself caught in a suffocating grip, its resources dwindling and morale plummeting. The political maneuvering within the city walls was just as dangerous as the armies outside. Elend Venture, Elend's father, played a long game, using his immense wealth and influence to slowly chip away at Elend's authority. His army, disciplined and well-supplied, positioned itself strategically to starve the city into submission, rather than risk a direct assault. Ashweather Set, on the other hand, was more volatile, his forces less organized but equally menacing, their presence adding another layer of unpredictable chaos to the already desperate situation. The Colossus, an enigma wrapped in a horrifying package, seemed to move with an unsettling, almost supernatural coordination, their numbers swelling with each passing day. Their presence on the battlefield was pure terror, their mindless ferocity a stark contrast to the tactical approaches of the human armies. Vin, ever vigilant, patrolled the city walls and the surrounding ashfalls, her mist-born senses stretched to their limits. She was a phantom in the night, a silent guardian, but even her extraordinary abilities had their limits in the face of such overwhelming forces. The pressure on Elend intensified daily. His council, composed of hesitant nobles and fearful advisors, offered little in the way of concrete solutions. His attempts to implement democratic reforms and establish a more equitable society were met with resistance and suspicion from those who still clung to the old ways of power and privilege. The idea of a king who genuinely cared for the common people was alien to them, and they saw his idealism as a weakness to be exploited. Vin, witnessing Elend's struggles, felt a growing frustration. She understood the intricacies of allomancy and the brutal realities of combat, but the nuances of diplomacy and political maneuvering were foreign to her. She longed for the simplicity of a clear enemy and a direct fight, but the enemy now was multifaceted, insidious, and often cloaked in the guise of supposed allies. Her relationship with Elend, while deeply loving, was also strained by the immense responsibilities they both bore. Elend, despite his scholarly nature, yearned to prove himself as a capable leader, to move beyond the shadow of his father and the legacy of the Lord Ruler. He devoured books on political theory and history, seeking answers in the wisdom of the past, but the current crisis offered no easy solutions. His belief in the power of reason and democratic ideals often clashed with the cynical pragmatism of his advisors, leading to frustrating stalemates. Clubbs, the surly smoker, found his role more critical than ever, using his copper cloud to shield allomancers from the probing senses of other Mistborn and Seekers, a vital defense in the escalating war of shadows. Doxan, the meticulous organizer, struggled to manage the city's dwindling resources and maintain order amidst the growing unrest. Breeze, the charming soother, used his allomancy to calm frayed nerves and subtly influence the emotions of the nobility, though even his persuasive abilities were stretched thin. Ham, the boisterous thug, provided a much-needed morale boost with his unwavering loyalty and strength, leading the city guard in desperate skirmishes on the walls. Sazed in his quiet pursuit of knowledge, continued to delve into the ancient texts and prophecies, his hope that the Well of Ascension might offer a solution burning brighter amidst the encroaching darkness. He sought clues not just for power, but for understanding, believing that only through a complete grasp of Scadrial's history could they truly chart a course for its future. The search for the Well, initially a vague legend, began to take on a more urgent and tangible quality as the situation in Luthadel deteriorated. The very air of the city was thick with despair and desperation, a suffocating blanket that threatened to extinguish the flickering flame of hope. The heroes of the Revolution, once celebrated saviors, now found themselves teetering on the brink of utter defeat, their hard-won freedom threatening to unravel into an even deeper abyss of chaos and destruction. The political landscape within Luthadel became increasingly treacherous, mirroring the physical threats outside its walls. Elend Venture's strategy of attrition was proving devastatingly effective. His spies and agents, subtle as ash falling on a moonless night, infiltrated every level of Luthadel's society, spreading rumors, inciting dissent, and undermining Elend's authority. The noble houses, once united in their opposition to the Lord Ruler, fractured into self-serving factions, each seeking to secure their own power and influence in the chaotic new order. Elend, despite his best intentions, struggled to navigate this labyrinth of deceit and ambition. His honest and straightforward approach often left him vulnerable to the cunning machinations of his opponents. He valued justice and fairness, but these principles seemed to hold little sway in a world still steeped in centuries of power-grabbing and ruthless pragmatism. Vin, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated. Her nature as a Mistborn, once a source of awe and fear, was now viewed with suspicion by many of the nobles, who saw her as a dangerous wild card, loyal only to Elend. Her attempts to adapt to courtly life were awkward and often misinterpreted, reinforcing the perception that she was more a weapon than a queen. She yearned for the clarity of battle, where intentions were clear and outcomes were decided by strength and skill, not by whispered lies and veiled threats. The Colossus, initially a distant threat, began to press their attacks with horrifying intensity, their sheer numbers overwhelming the desperate Luthadel defenders. Their relentless assaults on the city walls forced Elend to divert precious resources and soldiers away from the human armies, further weakening his position. The mystery surrounding their origins and their sudden, coordinated aggression deepened the sense of dread. Sazed, relentless in his pursuit of knowledge, unearthed a crucial piece of information about the Colossus. They were not natural creatures, but rather human beings transformed through a process of spiritual corruption and physical augmentation, their bodies growing larger and their minds becoming increasingly feral with each new spike driven into them. This revelation added a new layer of horror to their attacks, suggesting a deeper, more sinister force at play. He also began to decipher more precise clues about the Well of Ascension. The ancient prophecies hinted that the well was not merely a source of power, but a prison, a place where a dangerous entity had been sealed away by the Lord Ruler himself. This discovery sent a chill down Sazed's spine, raising the terrifying possibility that the Lord Ruler, for all his tyranny, might have been a necessary evil, preventing a far greater catastrophe. The search for the well transformed from a desperate quest for salvation into a race against an unknown but potentially apocalyptic force. As Luthadel weakened, Vin's instincts screamed for action. She couldn't stand by and watch the city crumble from within and without. She resumed her nighttime patrols with renewed intensity, pushing her Mistborn abilities to their absolute limits, seeking any advantage, any weakness in the enemy lines. Her encounters with Elend Venture's Allomancers became more frequent and more dangerous, a silent war being waged in the ash-choked skies above Luthadel. She uncovered evidence of noble treason, of those within the city conspiring with Straff, further highlighting the pervasive rot within the new government. The weight of these discoveries, coupled with the relentless pressure of the sieges, began to take a toll on her, pushing her to the brink of exhaustion. Her bond with Elend remained her anchor, but even that was tested by the sheer impossibility of their situation. The struggle for Luthadel was no longer just about survival. It was about defining what kind of world would emerge from the ashes, and whether their hard-won freedom would ultimately lead to salvation or to a ruin far greater than anything they had ever known. As the sieges intensified, Luthadel's plight grew increasingly dire. food and water became scarce, leading to widespread unrest among the common people, who had initially championed Elend but now saw his reign as one of starvation and constant fear. The once vibrant markets were hushed, replaced by the hushed whispers of despair and the occasional outbreak of desperate riots. Elend Venture, with his cold, calculating mind, continued to exploit these weaknesses, knowing that a city broken from within was far easier to conquer than one unified in defiance. He intensified his propaganda, painting Elend as an incompetent and idealistic fool, unworthy of the throne. Ashweather Set, ever the opportunist, saw the growing chaos as his chance to strike, launching more aggressive, though often uncoordinated, attacks against the city's perimeter. Vin found herself stretched to her absolute limit. Her nights were spent soaring above the city, scouting enemy positions, engaging in skirmishes with enemy allomancers, and even attempting to disrupt supply lines. Her encounters with Zane, a powerful and enigmatic Mistborn working for Elend Venture, became more frequent and more unsettling. Zane was a twisted reflection of Vin, a lonely and tormented soul who, like her, heard a strange voice in his head, a voice he called God, urging him to kill. Their duels were brutal ballets of allomantic power, each pushing the other to the brink, and Zane's strange philosophy, steeped in the idea of releasing Vin from her chains of attachment, began to subtly, insidiously, work its way into her thoughts, playing on her own feelings of isolation and her struggle to reconcile her nature as an assassin with her role as queen. The emotional toll of these encounters, coupled with the relentless pressure of the siege, began to weigh heavily on Vin. She questioned her purpose, her place, and whether she was truly capable of living a life beyond the constant struggle. Elend, sensing Vin's distress and the growing fragility of their situation, made a desperate plea for a more unified front among the remaining noble houses. He proposed a constitutional monarchy, a government where power would be shared, in an attempt to appease the squabbling factions and prevent further internal collapse. However, his efforts were met with suspicion and outright rejection by many, who saw it as a desperate move by a weak king. The political deadlock within Luthadel became an agonizing dance, with precious time slipping away as the enemy armies drew closer. Sazed's research into the Well of Ascension yielded more disturbing revelations. The Terracemen keepers had always believed the well was a source of great power that could be used to restore the world. However, the Lord Ruler's own annotations, found in the deepest archives, hinted at a darker truth. The well was not merely a source of power, but a prison containing a dangerous entity. The Lord Ruler had not used the power of the well to save the world, but to seal something away. This revelation shattered Sazed's understanding of Scadrial's history and the true nature of the Lord Ruler's reign. It forced him to confront the horrifying possibility that the Lord Ruler, for all his atrocities, might have been a necessary guardian against a far greater evil. The implications were profound and terrifying. If the well was a prison, then releasing its power could unleash something far more destructive than anything Scadrial had ever known. The search for the well now became a race against time, not just to find it, but to understand its true purpose before it was too late. The question of whether to release its power and what the consequences might be loomed large over their increasingly desperate circumstances, adding another layer of existential dread to the already overwhelming challenges faced by the heroes of Luthadel. The psychological warfare waged by Zane intensified, pushing Vin closer to the edge. He presented himself as a kindred spirit, someone who understood the loneliness and burden of being a Mistborn, particularly one as powerful as Vin. He spoke of the freedom that came with embracing one's true nature, of shedding the constraints of responsibility and societal expectations. His cryptic pronouncements and the shared experience of hearing a strange voice, his god, resonated with Vin's own internal struggles, making her question her loyalty to Elend and her place in the fragile new world. She found herself increasingly drawn to the thrill of their duels, to the raw, unbridled power they unleashed, a stark contrast to the stifling politics of the court. These clandestine meetings, though physically exhilarating, were emotionally draining, leaving her torn between her love for Elend and the unsettling allure of Zane's philosophy of ultimate freedom. Meanwhile, the strategic situation for Luthadel continued to deteriorate. The Colossus, now numbering in the hundreds of thousands, launched a massive, coordinated assault, their sheer weight of numbers threatening to overwhelm the city's defenses. The sight of their blue skin, their grotesque spikes, and their mindless, animalistic rage was enough to strike terror into the hearts of the most hardened soldiers. The human armies, witnessing the overwhelming power of the Colossus, hesitated, uncertain whether to continue their siege or retreat in the face of this new, terrifying threat. Elend Venture, ever the pragmatist, saw an opportunity in the chaos, hoping to swoop in and claim Luthadel once the Colossus had weakened its defenses. However, even he underestimated the destructive potential of the Colossus, who were not discriminating in their targets, attacking human armies with the same ferocity they attacked the city. Faced with impending doom, Elend made a desperate gamble. Recognizing that the nobility would never truly unite under his rule, he dissolved the assembly, stripping the corrupt nobles of their power and declaring martial law. This bold, almost tyrannical move, while necessary for survival, alienated many and further cemented his reputation as an idealist ill-suited for leadership. He then proposed a radical solution, a direct engagement with the Colossus. His plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal, relying on a unified, desperate defense to break the Colossus's momentum and buy them precious time. Vin, seeing Elend's unwavering commitment to his people, despite his political shortcomings, found her resolve renewed. The allure of Zane's offer of freedom began to wane as she witnessed Elend's selfless courage. She understood that true freedom wasn't about escaping responsibility, but about fighting for something worth protecting. The crew, battered but unbroken, rallied behind Elend. Spook, the young Tainai, discovered a newfound courage, his enhanced senses proving invaluable in coordinating defenses and detecting Colossus movements. Clubs, Ham, Doxon, and Breeze, each in their own way, contributed to the desperate struggle, their loyalty to the crew and to Elend unwavering. Sazed, haunted by his discoveries about the Well of Ascension, continued his frantic search for its location, and a way to either seal it permanently or understand how to wield its power without unleashing the hidden danger. He began to believe that the key lay not in physical might, but in a deeper understanding of Scadrial's history and the true nature of the Lord Ruler's intentions. The impending battle with the Colossus, however, threatened to overshadow everything, demanding their immediate attention and every ounce of their remaining strength. The fate of Luthadel, and perhaps all of Scadrial, rested on the outcome of this single, desperate stand, a last beacon of defiance against the overwhelming tide of destruction. The climactic battle with the Colossus began with a deafening roar, a blue tide of mindless destruction crashing against Luthadel's walls. The sheer numerical superiority of the Colossus was horrifying, their crude but powerful weapons smashing against stone and steel. The defenders, though outmatched, fought with the desperation of those with nothing left to lose. Elend, surprisingly, proved to be a capable and inspiring leader on the battlefield. His idealism, often a weakness in the political arena, transformed into an unwavering resolve, his presence on the walls a beacon of hope for his beleaguered soldiers. He fought with surprising ferocity, not as a king, but as a man defending his home and his people. Vin, unleashed from the constraints of courtly life, soared through the ash-choked skies, a whirlwind of steel and power. She was a force of nature, a one-woman army, her allomancy a dazzling display of controlled destruction. She focused on the Colossus leaders, the larger, older creatures that seemed to direct the mindless hordes, believing that if she could disrupt their command, she might sow chaos within their ranks. Her duels with Zane continued even amidst the chaos of the battle, their personal conflict mirroring the larger war. Zane, driven by his twisted interpretation of God's will, continued to try and persuade Vin to abandon Elend and embrace her true, solitary nature as a killing machine. He pushed her to her limits, physically and emotionally, attempting to break her spirit and sever her last ties to humanity. In one particularly intense confrontation, he explicitly revealed that the voice they both heard, which he attributed to God, was also influencing him to attack and destabilize the world, hinting at a far greater, more sinister force at play. This revelation, unsettling as it was, began to sow seeds of doubt in Vin's mind about the nature of this mysterious voice. The crew fought with their usual grit and ingenuity. Ham and clubs led desperate charges against the encroaching Colossus, their strength and allomancy pushing back the blue tide, even if only momentarily. Breeze used his soothing to calm the panic among the defenders, his abilities vital in maintaining morale amidst the overwhelming odds. Spook, utilizing his Tiny enhancements, became an invaluable scout and messenger, his swift movements allowing him to traverse the battlefield and relay critical information. Doxson, ever the pragmatic strategist, worked tirelessly to manage the dwindling resources and coordinate the defense, his calm demeanor a steadying influence in the face of utter chaos. Despite their heroic efforts, the Colossus continued to pour into the city. The outer walls were breached, and the battle became a desperate, bloody street-by-street struggle. Casualties mounted rapidly, and despair began to settle over the defenders like the ever-present ash. Sazed, meanwhile, continued his frantic research. The battle raging outside provided a grim backdrop to his intellectual pursuits, but the urgency of his quest intensified with every dying scream. He realized that the Well of Ascension was not just a historical curiosity, but a crucial element in understanding the true enemy. His studies revealed that the Lord Ruler had not merely sealed away a dangerous entity, but had manipulated the very fabric of Scadrial to maintain that seal. The mists, the ash, even Allomancy itself were all part of a grand, desperate design to keep the entity imprisoned. The magnitude of this discovery, the sheer scale of the Lord Ruler's efforts, was staggering. It painted him not just as a tyrant, but as a paradoxical protector, whose monstrous actions had inadvertently preserved the world from a far greater threat. The question of whether to release the power of the well became even more fraught with peril, a terrifying dilemma with potentially apocalyptic consequences. The fate of Luthadel and the world hung precariously in the balance, resting on the combined strength of desperate heroes and the chilling revelations of ancient knowledge. As the Colossus surged through the breaches in Luthadel's walls, the battle devolved into a brutal, visceral struggle for survival. The city, once a symbol of the Lord Ruler's unchallenged power, now became a graveyard. Buildings crumbled under the weight of the assault, and the air was thick with the stench of ash, blood, and fear. Even the most hardened soldiers began to falter, their hope dwindling with each wave of the relentless blue monsters. During the chaos, Straff, Venture, and Ashweather Set, ever opportunistic, saw their chance. Instead of aiding Luthadel, they turned their armies against each other, vying for the spoils they believed would soon be theirs once the Colossus had finished their destructive work. This betrayal, this utter disregard for human life, solidified Elend's resolve. He watched his father's cynical maneuvering with a cold fury, realizing that some men were beyond redemption. Vin, in her aerial assaults, spotted Zane engaging in his own dark form of revelry amidst the slaughter. He seemed to enjoy the chaos, embracing the role of the ultimate individual, detached from the suffering of others. Their final, inevitable confrontation took place high above the burning city, a desperate dance of allomantic power that overshadowed the terrestrial battle below. Vin, pushed to her absolute limit, finally understood Zane's true nature. He was a product of the same oppressive system they had fought against. But instead of breaking free, he had allowed his isolation and the sinister whispers of his god to twist him into something monstrous. The realization brought her a surge of clarity, reinforcing her own choice to fight for connection, for love, and for the hope of a better world. In a brutal, emotionally charged duel, Vin finally defeated Zane, a hollow victory that left her physically and emotionally scarred but strangely resolute. His death, however, did not silence the whispers that had tormented him, and a horrifying suspicion began to form in Vin's mind that the god Zane spoke of, the voice she herself occasionally heard, was something far more sinister, something that had been manipulating them both. With Zane eliminated, Vin redirected her fury towards the Colossus. She sought out the massive, ancient Colossus that seemed to exert a controlling influence over the others. These were not just large creatures, Sazed had explained, but Colossus that had consumed an immense amount of metal, growing beyond their original forms and becoming more formidable. She theorized that if she could sever the connection between the controller Kalos and the mindless horde, she might disrupt their unified assault. In a desperate, daring move, she confronted the largest of these controllers, engaging it in a brutal, up-close battle, pouring all of her strength and alamantic might into its defeat. The moment of its demise was followed by a chilling ripple effect. The other Kalos, suddenly devoid of their central command, began to fight amongst themselves, their mindless aggression turning inwards, causing a chaotic retreat from the city walls. This unexpected turning of the tide, however, was not enough to save Luthadel from the continued assaults of Straff and Set. The city was still under siege, its people decimated, its defenses crumbling. The victory against the Kalos, while significant, only bought them a temporary reprieve. Elend, despite the momentary respite, knew that their situation remained dire. He had sacrificed his political power, alienated the nobility, and pushed his people to the brink of extinction. The question now was not just how to win the war, but how to rebuild a society from the ashes of such overwhelming loss. Sazed, meanwhile, having processed the full implications of his discoveries, understood the terrifying truth. The Well of Ascension was indeed a prison, and the power contained within it was not meant to be released, but to be maintained. The Lord Ruler, in his own twisted way, had been holding back an entity of immense power and malevolent intent. The voice that Vin and Zane heard, the god that had manipulated them, was likely this very entity subtly influencing events, pushing them towards a path that would lead to its release. The realization that they had been playing directly into the hands of an ancient evil was a crushing blow, transforming their desperate quest for salvation into a race against an unknowable, unimaginable catastrophe. The final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, revealing a design far more ancient and terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The brief reprieve after the Kolos's retreat offered Luthadel a moment to breathe, but it was a gasp for air in a suffocating chamber. The human armies, witnessing the devastation wrought by the Kalos and the near collapse of Luthadel, decided to press their advantage. Elend Venture, his cold ambition undeterred, solidified his siege, knowing that the city was at its weakest point. Ashweather Set, recognizing the shift in power dynamics, began to consider a more direct assault, eyeing the city as ripe for the taking. The political maneuverings continued, but now with an even greater sense of urgency and desperation. Elend, having made the difficult decision to dissolve the assembly and effectively seize absolute power in a desperate attempt to save his people, found himself facing the ultimate test of his leadership. He was no longer the idealistic scholar, but a king forged in the crucible of war, making hard choices that often went against his very nature. His focus shifted entirely to the survival of his people, even if it meant sacrificing his own moral compass. He implemented harsh rationing, forced conscription, and ruthless crackdowns on dissent, actions that mirrored in some grim ways the tyranny they had fought to overthrow. This transformation was painful but necessary, a testament to the heavy crown he now wore. Vin, observing Elend's metamorphosis, found a renewed respect for him. She saw not weakness, but strength in his willingness to do what was necessary, even if it meant compromising his ideals. Her love for him deepened, cementing her resolve to protect him and their people, no matter the cost. Her own experiences with Zane and the chilling realization about the voice she had been hearing had solidified her understanding that true power wasn't about selfish indulgence, but about self-sacrifice and unwavering loyalty. She continued her nightly patrols, her senses sharper than ever, searching for any weakness in the besieging armies, any crack in their armor that she could exploit. Her encounters with enemy alimenters became more direct, more lethal, as she shed any lingering hesitation about using her powers to their full destructive potential. Sazed, after countless hours poring over the Lord Ruler's writings and the ancient Terraceman prophecies, made a horrifying breakthrough regarding the Well of Ascension. The Lord Ruler had not merely sealed away an entity, he had used the Well's power to make a bargain with it. The entity, which Sazed now identified as the very force that had corrupted Rashek, the Lord Ruler, before his transformation, and had been subtly manipulating events for centuries, was a being of pure malevolence, a fragment of something ancient and powerful known as Ruin. Ruin had sought release, and the Lord Ruler, in his attempt to save humanity, had used the Well's power to bind it, but at a terrible cost, the transformation of Scadrial into an ash-choked, mist-ridden world. The mists, the ash, the very system of alimency itself, were not natural phenomena, but rather the side effects of this ancient battle, a cosmic compromise to keep Ruin imprisoned. The Lord Ruler had become a tyrant not out of inherent evil, but out of a desperate, misguided attempt to prevent an apocalypse. This revelation was a profound shock to Sazed, shattering his long-held beliefs about the world and its history. It meant that the Hero of Ages prophecy was not about releasing the Well's power, but about containing it, about finding a way to permanently seal Ruin and restore Scadrial to its verdant past. The true challenge, then, was not to find the Well and use its power, but to find it and understand why it was a prison. The true threat was not the invading armies, but the unseen, insidious force that had been subtly manipulating the course of history, patiently awaiting its chance for release. The weight of this knowledge, the understanding of the vast cosmic forces at play, fell heavily upon Sazed, transforming his quiet scholarly pursuit into a desperate race against an ancient, insidious evil. The path forward was clear, yet terrifying. They had to reach the Well of Ascension, not to claim its power, but to ensure that Ruin remained forever bound. The final act of the Well of Ascension unfolded with agonizing intensity as the last desperate battle for Luthadel raged. The city was a ruin, a testament to the relentless sieges and the destructive power of war. Elend, now a seasoned and ruthless king, orchestrated a daring gambit. He offered an alliance to one of the besieging armies, promising them a share of Luthadel's meager resources and the chance to defeat their rival. It was a cynical, pragmatic move, one that the idealistic Elend of old would have recoiled from, but it was born of sheer desperation and a fierce determination to save his people. This fragile alliance, however, was merely a distraction, a way to buy precious time. Elend's true aim was to force a decisive confrontation, to break the stalemate that was slowly strangling his city. The remaining members of Kelsier's crew, thin on numbers but unbowed in spirit, stood by their king, their loyalty unwavering even as the world seemed to crumble around them. Vin, her understanding of the voice now terrifyingly clear, knew that her ultimate goal was not just to defeat the human armies, but to reach the Well of Ascension before Ruin could fully escape its prison. The whispers she had heard, the temptations Zane had offered, all made sense now as part of Ruin's insidious plan to manipulate its way to freedom. She realized that the Lord Ruler had not been a hero in the traditional sense, but a desperate man who had made the ultimate sacrifice, damning himself to tyranny to save the world from an even greater horror. This understanding filled her with a sense of grim purpose. Sazed, now possessed of the full, terrifying truth about the well, feverishly worked to guide Vin to its location. He understood that the prophecy of the hero of ages was not about a person, but about an action, the act of reaching the well and, crucially, making the right choice once there. His research revealed that the Well of Ascension was not in a distant, mystical land, but hidden beneath Credit Shaw, the Lord Ruler's own palace, now a ruin itself. The irony was palpable. The solution to their predicament had been beneath their feet all along, guarded by the very tyrant they had overthrown. As the climactic battle raged outside the palace, Vin made her desperate dash into the depths of Credit Shaw, guided by Sazed's hurried instructions. The journey into the ancient, crumbling foundations of the palace was fraught with peril, a labyrinth of traps and ancient mechanisms left by the Lord Ruler to protect his terrible secret. She faced lingering guardians, remnants of the Lord Ruler's paranoia, and the growing influence of Ruin itself, which whispered insidious temptations and doubts into her mind, urging her to use the power for selfish gain to escape her burdens. Vin's confrontation with the well was not a physical battle, but a test of will, a profound moral dilemma. The Well of Ascension was a shimmering pool of raw, untamed power, beckoning to her, promising endless possibilities. The voice, now louder and more seductive than ever, urged her to take the power, to use it to save her friends, to become a true god. She remembered Sazed's warnings, the chilling revelations about Ruin and the Lord Ruler's desperate compromise. The choice was agonizingly clear. To take the power would mean freeing Ruin, unleashing a force that would consume all of Scadrial. To leave the power untouched to seal the well would mean leaving Luthadel to its fate, sacrificing her friends and accepting the grim reality of defeat. In a moment of supreme self-sacrifice, driven by her love for Elend and her unwavering commitment to their dream of a better world, Vin made the agonizing choice not to take the power from the well. Instead, she chose to release it, believing, mistakenly, that this was the only way to seal it forever. The energy surged from the well, a blinding torrent of power that seemingly flowed out of the world. In that agonizing moment of release, however, Vin unknowingly played directly into Ruin's hands. The act of releasing the power was not a seal, but a final, irreversible undoing of the Lord Ruler's ancient prison. The world shuddered, the ashfalls intensified, and a chilling realization dawned upon Vin as a new, more sinister presence began to stir within the mists, a presence that now felt terrifyingly unconstrained. the true horror of Ruin's cunning manipulation became horrifyingly clear. The immediate aftermath of Vin's decision at the Well of Ascension was a chaotic maelstrom of desperate battle and dawning horror. As the power flowed out of the well, an intangible, malevolent presence began to solidify around Luthadel, its influence palpable and terrifying. The mists, once a mysterious, somewhat benign aspect of Scadrial, twisted and writhed with a newfound sentience, their tendrils lashing out with chilling precision. They began to consume people, drawing them into themselves, their victims vanishing without a trace. This was Ruin, unbound, its power now seeping into the very fabric of the world. The surviving members of the crew, including Elend, were caught in the escalating terror. Elend, despite his kingly mantle, was still a scholar at heart, and the sheer, incomprehensible malevolence of Ruin was a force beyond anything he could have imagined. He fought with grim determination, trying to protect his people from the unfolding apocalypse, but the fight was hopeless. He was cornered, overwhelmed by the newly empowered Colossus and the terrifying mists. In a moment of desperate defiance facing certain death, Elend did something unexpected. He ingested a bead of Laracium, the mythical metal Kelsier had spoken of, which had been concealed within his father's possessions, meant for his own use. This bead, as the Lord Ruler had created it, was a concentrated piece of preservation, the opposing force to Ruin. Consuming it, Elend was transformed, instantly becoming a Mistborn of unparalleled power, his abilities far exceeding even Vin's. The transformation was swift and brutal, awakening within him an innate understanding of allomancy and the nature of the world that had been hidden from him. He became a living weapon, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness, embodying the very essence of the power he had sought to understand through books. Simultaneously, Vin, still reeling from her horrific realization at the well, was ambushed by a figure who revealed himself to be the source of the voice, a physical manifestation of Ruin itself, now free. This entity, a being of pure malice and destruction, confronted her, mocking her choice at the well and revealing the true extent of its ancient machinations. It confirmed that it had been subtly manipulating events for centuries, influencing individuals like Zane and even whispering to Vin, all to orchestrate its own release. The chilling truth was that Vin's selfless act, her attempt to seal the well, had been the final key to unlocking Ruin's prison, a cruel twist of fate engineered by a master manipulator. Ruin explained its nature. It was the force of decay, of entropy, meant to bring all things to their end, a necessary counterpoint to preservation which sought to maintain. However, Ruin, now unchained, sought only to destroy, to bring about total annihilation. As Ruin pressed its attack, Vin, now facing a being of cosmic power, found herself overwhelmed. Yet, in her dying moments, a glimmer of truth from Sazed's research, a faint whisper of knowledge about the true nature of preservation and Ruin, ignited within her. She realized that allomancy itself was a gift from preservation, a way for humanity to resist Ruin's influence. In a final, desperate act, channeling the remnants of her strength and a flash of insight, Vin pierced Ruin with the very last adium she possessed, a metal that allowed its user to see into the future, and as she now understood, was a pure manifestation of Ruin's own body, its true form. The act was not to kill ruin, for such a feat was impossible for a mortal, but to momentarily destabilize its physical form to buy precious time. In that same moment, Sazed, having reached the very precipice of despair and the abyss of broken faith, found himself on the verge of giving up. He had seen too much destruction, too much suffering, and his centuries of preserving knowledge seemed futile in the face of such overwhelming evil. But just as he was about to surrender to the pervasive influence of ruin, a profound realization struck him. He remembered something fundamental about the Terrace prophecies, a forgotten truth, a deeper understanding of the balance between preservation and ruin. He understood that the hero of ages was not meant to be a fighter or even a king, but a keeper, someone who understood the true nature of the powers and could reforge the balance. He grasped the true power of the well, not as a source of energy to be used, but as a crucible where these cosmic forces intersected. It wasn't about taking the power, but about understanding it. As Vin, gravely wounded, collapsed, and Elend fought with his newly awakened Mistborn abilities, Sazed, now armed with a complete understanding of the prophecy and the true nature of the well, initiated a final, desperate act of his own. He was no fighter, but he was a keeper, a scholar, and his knowledge was now their ultimate weapon. The Well of Ascension is a masterclass in building upon a compelling foundation, expertly deepening the lore of Scadrial while simultaneously unraveling the comfortable assumptions established in the final empire. Brandon Sanderson skillfully navigates the complexities of newfound freedom, revealing that the collapse of tyranny often ushers in an even more dangerous period of chaos and uncertainty. The novel delves profoundly into the immense weight of leadership, portraying Elend's painful transformation from an idealistic scholar to a hardened, pragmatic king, a poignant exploration of how power can corrupt, but also how necessity can forge unexpected strength. Vin's internal struggle, her battle to reconcile her identity as an assassin with her desire for a normal life, provides a compelling emotional core, further complicated by the insidious manipulations of ruin, highlighting the psychological warfare that is often more devastating than physical conflict. The revelation of the Well of Ascension as a prison, and the terrifying truth about the Lord Ruler's desperate bargain, ingeniously recontextualizes the entire history of Scadrial, transforming a seemingly benevolent deity into a paradoxical villain turned savior. This brilliant twist elevates the narrative beyond a simple good versus evil fantasy, delving into shades of gray and the inherent costs of attempting to control cosmic forces. Ultimately, the Well of Ascension serves not only as a thrilling continuation of the Mistborn saga, but as a profound meditation on the nature of power, the burden of choice, and the chilling realization that some battles are fought not with swords and magic, but with ancient prophecies and the very fabric of reality itself. It leaves the reader breathless, eager to uncover the final resolution to a conflict far grander and more terrifying than initially imagined.